Hello, 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 my sweet friends, and welcome back to another episode of Type 1 Thursday with me, Hanna, one of the co-founders of the Low Carb Universe, of course, and as well as a Type 1 diabetic for quite some time, not to mention 34 years. So I am happy to share a little bit of my tips and tricks that I've collected throughout the years with you in this beautiful Shindig series. And today is actually about a question that I got on one of the social media platforms. I want to say that it was Instagram, and it's very possible that it was, but let's say it was Instagram. And that was wondering about whether it is necessary to use an insulin pump, or if multiple daily injections, so either with pen or syringe, is better for a diabetic, which, this is very difficult because this is a highly, of course, individual topic. And in my opinion, I can only give that, really. It doesn't really matter what you use to deliver the insulin that you do need as a type 1 diabetic, as long as you do. And if your diabetes is managed with maybe a completely crazy version of either MDI or insulin pump or whatever, then hey, that's fantastic. You found what works for you, and that is great. But today, I wanted to have a conversation started with you. We can happily continue the conversation in the comments below. But I wanted to outline sort of my pros and cons for both MDI, which is multiple daily injections. You deliver your insulin by injecting yourself every so often with both basal and bolus insulins, or also pros and cons for the insulin pump that I've noticed for the past couple of years, and see what perhaps fits a little bit better. Maybe this can help you make up your mind. Maybe you find out something that you want to try. Let me know in a comment, and I'll be very, very, very happy to chat with you there a little bit afterwards. So my story in regards to my insulin delivery method has been a little bit, well, I was actually flat out refusing to have an insulin pump for so many years. I think I had diabetes for 27 years or something before I finally agreed with my diabetes educator or my diabetes nurse that okay, fine, now I'm ready to try. And this is despite healthcare professionals suggesting this to me for the majority of my upbringing. Well, maybe not in the 80s, they weren't super common back then, but since they have become more common, insulin pumps, they have been suggested to me every once in a while, and I've always refused because, and this was my biggest con for the insulin pump back then, was that there's something always attached to me. I was afraid that I would feel sicker than I have to be. I was afraid that I'd be constantly reminded of that I am I'm chronically awesome, but maybe that I'm not as chronically healthy as I would like myself to be, or as other people may be. So I was very, very hesitant and wary ahead of getting myself my first insulin pump. And that was, I opted back then for a tubeless pump, which then morphed into a tubed pump. Not that long ago, about 1.5 years ago, I took the step to a tube pump for a variety of reasons, which we can happily discuss maybe a little bit later. Yeah, I've done multiple daily injections a lot longer than I have lived with an insulin pump constantly attached to my body, but I just wanted to outline maybe a few pros and cons of them each, so that we can keep on discussing it later. So let's start with MDI, as that's where I actually have most of my experience, personal experience. And I wanted to start with the pros because this is a biggie for me and for very many other people who live with diabetes, it is, of course, the freedom factor. With multiple daily injections, you don't have anything attached to your body, unless you're wearing a CGM, but then, it's a lot smaller, and maybe you don't want two things connected to your body, attached to your body at all times and all that stuff. So the freedom factor is definitely a huge pro when it comes to MDI. Hand in hand with this goes also that it makes the illness more invisible, because of course you don't have a pager looking thing stuck to your hip or your clothes somewhere, or you don't have, if you have a tubeless pump, you don't have this big a thing like stuck to your body and like it pokes out, and it becomes a very much more visible illness to live with. If you do multiple daily injections, you can of course also take a lot more different types of insulin, because insulin in different types, in different forms, of course, act in different hours or during different times. So for example, as Dr. Bernstein always recommends a lot, is that you take, for example, regular insulin or our insulin to cover protein, the protein spike that comes a few hours after you eat a lot of protein. It's easier to do if you are on MDI than having to remember to also have another shot when you're on an insulin pump. You can also then take fast acting, which you have to for bolus to correct a high blood sugar or for covering for carbs, and then you can choose which long acting insulin that you combine this with. In a way more flexible when it comes to types of insulin that you take, and you can find a routine and a regime that works for you and for your diabetes to manage that properly. It's also, perhaps you can think that it's a bit simpler to be on multiple daily injections. You take an injection, it's done, instead of having to care for, every time you remove a piece of clothing or something, that the tubing gets stuck, or you get stuck on you snag the infusion set, or stuff like that. So it can be seen as it is easier to be on MDI. Then if you get the benefits, then why not stay with that? That's great. I think it can also be argued that MDI is cheaper than being on the pump. With the pump comes very many things that you have to perhaps pay, such as a rent of the pump. I have to pay rent every month for wearing my pump or for having my pump. All the supplies cost, of course, a lot, and it's not just the insulin that costs. And with MDI, either you have syringes that are reasonably cheap, or you have insulin pens that most people with diabetes actually get for free. So it can be seen that it is a cheaper way of managing diabetes as well. Also, from a very superficial point of view, sometimes you need to be that too. You can wear anything and you won't see any devices poking out or sticking out or being in the way, or there's a seam, or there's something that is, just obstructing either the pump or the tubing or something like that. So with MDI, you are freer in that way too. So I would conclude that with the main point of the pros of MDI is freedom, really. The cons of MDI, though, I find it now with hindsight, I really think that it is quite inconvenient to be on MDI for myself. I can only speak for myself in this video. So every time that you have to correct, every time it's time for the basal shot, you always have to pull up your shirt, or all of these things. So for me, it became quite inconvenient, because I also had to inject myself about 10 times a day before I swapped to the pump. And that was a big sales argument for me, to be honest, not having to pierce myself with a needle 10 times a day, only do it once every 3 days. That sounded like heaven to me, and that's why I went for it, actually. You have to remember, of course, this is a con, you have to remember to take your basal insulin at the right time. And this is also an effort. It became an effort for me to try to remember when and how and all these things, and how much and which dose at this time of day, all this stuff. So it wasn't always... I see that as a con for MDI. In my opinion, you have a lot more to carry along with you when you leave the house. So you don't need, I mean, an insulin pump is always on you. So that's it for the insulin thing. Then you need a blood sugar meter, maybe some glucose tabs and stuff like that when you leave the house, and that's fine. That's a lot easier to carry than, 2 types of pens and the pen needles and blah, 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 blah. For me, it becomes a lot more carrying along. For most people, this is not a problem, but for me, I didn't quite enjoy schlepping that much stuff around. It goes, again, back to the slightly inconvenient part. You have to expose body parts. And usually this is not a problem at all, whether you're female, male, whatever. But, imagine when it's really, really cold and you have to like take off your shirt and you feel that icy wind against your skin, and then you have to also inject yourself. I don't miss that at all. And also, I really do enjoy the fact that, for example, if I am out and about around town or something, I can just take up my insulin pump. I can look like I'm texting or whatever ignorant people choose to believe. And, I've saved my life with more insulin if that's what I need, or turned off the basal if that's what I need, or turned down the basal if that's what I need. But, it becomes for me a little bit inconvenient to expose body parts here and there around, especially when I'm out and about. Also, the importance of rotating sites becomes very, very big on MDI, because we all have those favorite spots that we like to inject ourselves in. And that's fine, that's fantastic, but you do have to rotate. And I noticed for myself that it is a lot easier for me to rotate pump sites than it was to rotate injection sites. It even got so bad that no one could touch my upper thighs for a while, because I had just injected so much long-acting insulin into them. And so rotation of spots becomes really important. So those were my cons for MDI. In conclusion, inconvenient to me, in my opinion. Let's move over to the insulin pump. So the pros for the insulin pump for me is that it is very, very flexible. I can be very flexible with my basal rate, for example. If I notice that I'm trending upwards, I can change it. I can add on a bit of temporary basal units to see if that's the problem or if there's something else going on in my body. And also with the bolus, because you have the different bolus profiles. And instead of then, as I was talking about in MDI, you can use different insulins for this. You use the same insulin the whole time, just in different profiles, so to speak. So that it's for me, it's a lot easier to just remember that I have one thing and I can do different things with the same one thing. This is my favorite pump benefit. It is microbolusing. So I can take boluses in the size of 0.1 unit, for example, if I really, really want to, or 0.05 on some pumps. But this is not possible on MDI, because there you have the minimum unit is, of course, half a unit. So it depends a little bit how you want, how tightly you want to steer your diabetes ship. And I really like the fact that I can really really micromanage it to a certain extent. Not overly so, of course, because that becomes ridiculous on all other levels, but it is very nice that I can do a little bit of microbolusing every here and there. So when I see the CGM trending up, I'm like, oh, let's try with 0 point something units and see if it comes a little bit down on its own. If not, then I, of course, have to redo and recalculate, but it is a good check for me to see if that's what's wrong. As I mentioned before, it is very easy to do on the go, to handle when you are on the go. You can even do it during like a business meeting. I have done that many times before. When you're out with friends, if you are in a busy street, if you are at imagine a farmer's market, for example. It's rush hour at the farmer's market, and you feel, or you get a notification from your CGM that your blood sugar is a little bit high. You would like to correct, but you can't really find a quiet corner. And so with an insulin pump, it's a lot easier, because you just blip a few buttons and you're done. You've taken care of the situation and you can move on with your day. To a certain extent, I also find that it's more efficient for me to treat and manage my diabetes with an insulin pump. I don't use nearly half of the insulin as I did before, and I also don't, it's just a lot. Spend as much time. I also don't spend as much time managing diabetes as I did with MDI. Also, of course, you have a lot, if you are a data nerd, if you like data, you have a lot of data to take care of and see and have insights and analyze and see trends and all these things. And the ever so important tech integration. Many pumps now, or more and more pumps now, do integrate with a CGM, and so that you can get both things in the same device, and also, of course, the looping possibilities that are coming up now that are very, very exciting to everyone who lives with diabetes. The cons of insulin pumps. Yes, there are cons with these ones too. They're not all just roses and happy flower dances. They also have some cons, and the ones that I can think of, please let me know in the comments if you have any more, but these are the ones that I can think of. And I already mentioned one of them, which is, of course, that this is something that you always have attached to your body, and that can be very draining, both emotionally and physically and mentally for some, and it's not always easy to always be connected in that way. The tubing, if you have a tube pump, it does get caught on stuff like door handles and other things, clothing, everything. So it's not really the most maybe smooth thing in the world to live with. You do have to watch out and make sure that your tubing is inside your clothing, preferably, so that you don't snag it somewhere. I find that using an insulin pump produces a lot more trash than MDI, and I'm not really happy about that. But as it is a lot easier for me to manage my diabetes with the help of an insulin pump, I keep with it, and I hope and pray that the insulin pump provider companies will at some point really reconsider their recycling things, so that you can maybe even send the stuff back so that they can take care of it. And not to mention Dexcom, please get your act together. But that's for another video. One problem with insulin pumps is that if it for some reason malfunctions, and that can be the site malfunctions, the battery runs out, or the insulin goes bad, or the machine gets some sort of hiccup, if it somehow malfunctions, you don't get any insulin at all, and that can become dangerous quite quickly. So that is one of the bigger cons actually for an insulin pump for me. Airport security. When you travel, insulin pumps can sometimes get a little bit interesting. They will want to swipe them for explosives and all kinds of things. And for certain airports, I do have to calculate more time into consideration when I travel through there, because they just don't know really what it is yet. It is unfortunately becoming more and more common, so it is less and less of a problem. But sometimes I can happily maybe be on MDI for a trip maybe. What do you have to add in terms of pros and cons for MDI, or pros and cons for insulin pumps? What do you use to deliver insulin? Please let me know in a comment below, and I will be happy to chat with you there. Until next time, my sweet, sweet friends, goodbye.